Good morning, colleagues, and thank you so much for joining us for this call. We really appreciate you making time to be with us today and to share your experiences for our food security think tank session. We are going to start off by articulating what the ultimate goal of this session is, and we're going to talk about who is in the room, where we all quickly introduce ourselves, where we're from, and what our roles are. And then we'll move on to the overview of today's programs and also the roles of the participants and especially the experts that are going to inform this session. So the ultimate goal for this think tank session is really for us to understand what the issues are in relation to food security, especially in the context of COVID-19 and beyond. The discussions from this session will help us to frame a problem statement which will allow us to bring new ideas and solutions that enable groundbreaking changes related to food security now and beyond, especially in most countries right now that are affected, especially Africa, that is affected by COVID-19. We see a lot of concerns around the availability of food for the poor mainly, and obviously for the general populations. So we are hoping that the outcome of this session will help us to understand what those issues are, why are people going hungry, and how do we solve the issue of hunger in Africa using the resources that are available to us, and also creating opportunities for entrepreneurs and the Africa Intertrade conversation. We thank you so much. Now we'll move on to who is in the room, and we can all introduce ourselves from here. Thank you very much.
Every time, and we workshop innovations. At the moment, we're a bit stuck with COVID, but I ran a virtual lab, but that is basically what I do. Thank you.
Thank you there, Dr. Malan. Anyone else?
I can introduce myself, Precious. Thank you. My name is Monique van de Vijver, Dutch last name, also a resident in the Netherlands. I work for Solidaridad at the network level, and I'm looking into for the organization how we can, as Solidaridad, support the transition to more sustainable food systems. And when we talk about sustainability, it's about the economic part, the ecological part, and of course the social part. And I think as Solidaridad, we've come a long way in trying to find solutions, market-based solutions that work for farmers. I think we've learned a lot through this long journey, and I think we're ready also now, based on these learnings, to find new, more locally based market solutions for farmers in a combination with maybe more export-oriented solutions. But I think what is clear to all of us is that any food system must work for farmers first. And I'm happy to be in this webinar, and I'm eager to learn from all of you, understand your realities better, and see from where I'm seated how I can contribute. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monique.
Who's the second, Precious?
Anyone wants to go next?
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Stephanie Donu. I work for Solidaridad West Africa. I am the head of Gender and Quality Management Systems. This morning, I'll be very happy to share how the perspectives on food security in the West African region look like, and then also listen to what's happening in other regions, and then hopefully after that session, we'll come up with lasting solutions that would help to address the problem. I mean, COVID has hit us so hard, and we have to be very intentional in our approach so that after COVID, we do not find ourselves battling another issue of the hunger pandemic. So I'm quite excited to be here, and I look forward to very happy and exciting exchanges. Thank you.
Thank you, Steph, and welcome on board. I was just replying to your email. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to maybe introduce myself as well. My name is, I'm not a panelist today, but I'm the managing director for Solidaridad here in Southern Africa. We're really passionate about, working with farmers, across our region to not only improve food security, but to improve entire food systems. And make sure that they are transformed to become more sustainable. And for us, sustainability is really, an approach that brings about prosperity at the farm level and in the community. We also believe quite strongly that it should be in balance with nature. And we also believe in inclusivity. And for us, inclusivity is really about ensuring that particularly women have their place in the sun in agriculture and food systems. But I think another group that is very important to us and we believe needs to be included in this conversation is young people, who, as you know, are more than 60% of our population in the region. And they are both present and future consumers. And it's important for us to ensure that we don't talk about food and not talk about them as well. So I'm really looking forward to a great dialogue, and I wish this webinar all the best of success. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandla. Thank you so much. Anyone else wants to go forward?
Good morning. Hi. My name is Lebu Biko, and I form part of the Womanomics team together with my partner Rehema. And today we'll be partnering with Precious to guide us through the rest of the time that we have. And Womanomics is an organization that we founded about 2 years ago. And the purpose of the organization is to make sure that women are at the heart of driving economics on the continent. So I think, as Mandla had said, it's quite clear that women are not in driving growth in the most significant part of the economies, and particularly tend to be the ones that are receiving less in terms of value, in terms of what is being put in their pocket. So our biggest focus is around saying, how do we connect women to information, to insights, to ecosystems? How do we connect them to opportunities so that they can begin to participate in significant parts of the economy, particularly off the back of the free trade agreement, and making sure that they are able to benefit from Africa trading more with itself? And most importantly, then how do we make sure that we're able to connect them to the capacity and the skills that they need to be able to participate in those spaces? So we're quite excited about the conversation today, because one of our key focus areas is on agriculture, particularly given its significance on the continent, but also knowing that women tend to be the ones that are at the backbone of this industry in terms of the labor, but not necessarily in terms of money in the pocket and what they actually get. So we're quite keen on this conversation to make sure that we are able to co-create what those solutions need to be, so that women are able to participate more effectively. So thank you everybody for making the time. And we are also looking forward to the insights that will be shared today, with a view of putting together problem statements, as Precious said, that can allow us to invite more innovative solutions around this issue of food security.
Thank you, Lebo. Thank you. That was a great introduction to Womanomics. I think I'll go first. So most of you will know me anyway. I don't think I need any introduction, but anyway, for those who probably don't know me that well, I'm Precious Grihi, and I'm the Gender and Youth Advisor for Solidaridad. I have been with Solidaridad for this is my 3rd year almost. And I'm really excited about the work that we are doing actually to ensure there's inclusivity across all the programs within Solidaridad. And obviously, as Mandla said, the other important component is not just women, but it's also youth, because we have a wealth of energy in Africa, and that is in the form of youth. And it is exciting that we are having this talk today to kind of see what are some of the economic pathways or highways that, you know, women and youth can play in the food of so in the space of food security. And I'm really happy that we are having this discussion, and I look forward to some of the ideas or the innovative ideas that will come out of this session that we could potentially and hopefully package into tangible programs or projects that will actually be groundbreaking in terms of not just mitigating the current impact of COVID, but obviously looking beyond this pandemic. And yeah, thank you so much once again for joining. And over to the next person who wants to introduce themselves. Thank you.
I think everybody's introduced themselves, bar from my colleague Rehema. I think she's having some connectivity issues, so she keeps on getting booted off the call. So I think she'll come back as soon as her connection works. But I think, Precious, I'm also cognizant of time. I understood that Stephanie had very, very limited time of all of us. As I can appreciate, time is precious for everyone. So I think perhaps let's kick off, at least start the conversation, and then we'll pick any other conversations that we need to have with anybody along the way.
No problem. I think we might actually finish earlier, just to let, I see Mandla also has to jump off early. Monique also has to jump off early. In fact, most of the people that are on this call need to jump off early. So just to assure you that we are hoping to also finish a bit earlier than originally envisioned, mainly because two of our speakers couldn't make it, Mezwane and Prof Rudolph. So anyway, over to Stephanie, if you are ready. Welcome again, and please go ahead and present. I'm not sure if we label, are we able to project from our side, or she can do from her side?
She can.
Yes, so I'll be sharing my screen if it's fine.
Yes, she can share. She can share. Right. Just a quick question. I just want to understand everybody, what is everybody needing to leave early, just so that we can manage time effectively for the process. Dr. Malan, I know you said you had until 11:30, so we're clear on that. Stephanie, I know that you needed to go off probably just as soon as you've kind of engaged with us, so I appreciate that. Anybody else who needing to leave early, just so that we can manage that we have as much time as possible with everybody, and make sure that we get through as much as we can with everybody on. Mandla, how long are you with us for? And Monique?
Until 11. He's with us until 11.
And Monique?
Monique also until 11, right, Monique?
Yep. Okay, cool. All right, thank you. Thank you, that is helpful. Rehema on the other side is just also trying to connect our colleague from Ghana, Maureen. I think she's having connection issues, so she's just stepped out so she can help her in the background. But Stephanie, please do go ahead. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. Please let me know if you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can see it.
All right. So I'm very excited to share on food security in West Africa, especially in the wake of COVID. This has been very strange times, and we keep going by the adage, we are not in normal times. And indeed, our food security has also seen shocks, and it's really going to prove that indeed we are not in normal times. So Precious communicated that I have just about 15 minutes to share a bit on the effects of COVID-19 on food security in West Africa. So I'll basically do a bit of an introduction and delve down into how COVID has impacted on food availability, access, food consumption, and utilization, and then just provide a few recommendations and then conclude. I hope I'm able to do all of that in the 15 minutes that has been allotted to me. Right. So,
Sorry, Stephanie, before
hi,
you
Mandla.
proceed, it's Mandla.
Yes.
Could you just go on to presentation mode? Some of us are not so young anymore, so the font
Sorry.
becomes too small. Yeah.
Sorry, Mandla. I thought I was already in there. All right. So I guess it's fine now, right?
Yes, thank you very much, Stephanie.
Thank you. So FAO tells us that food security exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy lifestyle. So as per the definition, there are a couple of parameters that should be met for us to be able to say that a person is food secured. There has to be physical and economic access. The food has to be sufficient, it has to be safe, it has to be nutritious, and also it should meet their dietary and food preferences so they are able to live very active and healthy lifestyle, right? So we've been told there are some core pillars in terms of food security. We are talking about availability, and that has to do with having sufficient quantities of appropriate food available. There's also the component of access, that individuals need to have adequate income or other resources to access food. And the third pillar looks at the utilization, consumption, people's ability to use the food. So having the adequate dietary intake and the ability to absorb and for the body to also use the nutrients. And underlining these core pillars is the pillar of stability, right? So stability needs to run through all these core pillars because the food has to be available constantly over a period of time. Availability of food needs to be stable over a period of time. People's ability to access, purchase, buy the food, that ability should be stable over a period of time. And then also the individual's consumption of the food should be stable over a period of time before we can claim total food security. I am trying to expound a bit on the pillars because I am building my presentations on the various pillars on how COVID has impacted the various pillars of food security in the region. Now, in terms of availability, there's been disruptions in local food supply chains. I mean, the sector has been bedeviled with issues prior to COVID. Before COVID, we were battling with the fall armyworm that was destroying our food crops. There are issues of unstable climatic conditions. There are issues of poor access to improved seedlings and all of that. The sector wasn't very, very strong before COVID. COVID has just come to, throw more light on the challenges in the sector. And now with COVID, there are issues of access to the human capital, the labor to now work in the farms and then produce the food. Food food is an essential commodity. Nothing should stop the flow of food, but you realize that the panic and fear of people coming into contact with the infection makes it quite difficult for laborers to go out there in the field and then do their normal things. So that has impacted availability. There's also the issue of closure of markets and restaurants. One of the main protocols that have been proposed as a way of managing the pandemic is for individuals to observe social distancing, right? And then in the big markets and busy markets, sellers are unable to observe social distancing. So governments had to take the bold decision to close certain markets. There are records of that happening here in Ghana. We had that in Cote d'Ivoire. Senegal also recorded that, where huge busy markets in capitals were closed. And this hits households very hard because the markets are the main collecting points for food. So when they're closed like that, the people were automatically cut off from being able to acquire their regular food supplies. And closely linked to that was the issue of the closure of restaurants. At the time of lockdowns, some restaurants didn't open because they wanted to protect themselves and their employees from contamination, from getting the COVID-19. So you find that several restaurants were closed. Now, for families that are used to eating outside, for people who are out of town, for tourists, that was also a problem because they couldn't get access to their regular meals. And thirdly, on the availability aspect has to do with farmers hoarding their produce. And you can't blame farmers because nobody really knows how the pandemic is going to evolve. During the time of lockdowns, I mean, in this region, so many countries implemented lockdowns, others instituted curfews, others had state of emergencies. I mean, no matter whatever you want to call it, there was still that restriction on movement at a certain point. And during those periods, people couldn't readily and easily get food, right? So you have to depend on your stock. And I guess that has been the fear for farmers, right? They're asking, if I take all my produce to the market and there happens to be another lockdown, how am I able to gonna get food to cater for my family's dietary needs? So there's been lots of accounts of farmers hoarding their produce. If previously they sent about 80% of their produce to the market, now they are doing less because they want to keep the rest because of the uncertainty. The numbers keep increasing every day, and you always have at the back of your mind that, well, with the way things are going, then it's likely we are going to go into another phase of lockdown, and you would want to be prepared for that. So I guess that's been the reason why farmers do not release the bulk of their produce to the market. Last on the availability has to do with the closure of airports and borders. Movements have been restricted to a great extent. Ideally, food supplies that are essential commodities shouldn't be affected, but then there's been lots of reports on harassment happening at border towns, unnecessary interrogations, customs officials wanting to take bribes and stuff like that. So you find that the produce takes a longer time to move from the farm gate to the market or to the point of sale, and there's a lot of wastage, especially for the perishable commodities, and that hasn't really been helpful for food availability in the system. Now I'll move to the to access. How has access to food security been impacted by COVID? There's been increase in food prices. Food prices have gone through the roof. I mean, due to the increase in demand. In Ghana, our lockdown was implemented on 30th March. On the 29th March, I went out to town to try and see if I could get bread to buy for the family. I roamed the whole of Accra. I didn't get a single loaf of bread to buy. That is how bad the situation was. And then I text my work colleagues in Liberia and Sierra Leone trying to understand what's happening. They're like, Stephanie, it's the same problem over there. You know, so the level of panic buying just necessitated sellers and vendors increasing their price because they needed also to cash in on the issue. Secondly, there's been lots of job losses and livelihoods, and employers have had to lay off their workers because of the slow traffic of work. They're unable to continue paying salaries, so they've had to let people go. And in these parts, many private businesses have had to really slow down because one of the things we are told is in this campaign is stay at home. If you have no business in town, stay at home. And people stay at home, they don't go out to patronize businesses. So people have had to let their staff go. And this has been really, really, really difficult for many workers. Remember, food prices are going up, but people's ability to buy is also going very low. They are losing their purchasing power. So these two variables in the equation are going in very opposite directions, and this affects individuals' economic ability to access food. And third on this aspect has to do with the high poverty levels in the region. Most people here are daily wage earners, and they have not saved up enough money to stock up on food. So it was so sad during when lockdowns and curfews were implemented, because they couldn't go out to ply their trade, and they did have food already in the house. And there was this struggle between, do I stay home and keep safe from the pandemic, or do I try to go out and encounter the law enforcement agencies, or catch the virus at some point, all in a bid to find my daily bread. It was such a struggle. And in this part where people are daily wage earners, it was very, very difficult for people to like really get access to their daily food, because they had to go out, work, make their daily sales, and then buy food supplies from the daily sales. Now, even if people decided to brave the odds and go out there to ply their trades, customers were not coming out to buy, so they still couldn't raise their minimum sales for the day to still keep their families running. Now, on utilization, I'm afraid the focus for many people has been on survival and not on nutrition. People would rather assuage their hunger and not worry much about having a balanced diet, because one, they are unable to afford it, or two, the balanced diet is not available. And I believe it's a natural human crisis management tool, right? If you are in the middle of a crisis, your focus is staying alive, not really on what makes up the food I'm eating. You just want to satisfy the cravings of your stomach, but not the quality of food that you consume. That has been the reality in this part. And it's very sad, because if this is not managed very well, especially for nursing mothers and children, then we are looking at a disaster in the near future. Children are going to get stunted, and I'm not a health expert, but I believe stunted growth is not easily treated. So stunted children will become stunted adults, and unhealthy adult population is not very good for national development. So this is a wake-up call for all stakeholders involved to really pay attention to the problem at hand. We are fighting a health crisis, yes, but we also need to look at the food and nutrition security aspect, so that in our efforts of solving the COVID problem, we do not create another problem in the process. Just to round off, we are battling a health pandemic, yes, but we must put in place adequate measures so that COVID does not leave in its wake a hunger or a food pandemic. If the situation is not managed, unfortunately, the little efforts I believe we have made in this front will be greatly reversed. I believe it took us a lot of time to get to where we are in terms of food security. And if anything at all, we should consolidate the gains we have made, not to reverse the gains we have made. And the multi-stakeholder approach is needed to make this thing happen. What ways can farmers be supported? What ways can the agricultural sector in West Africa be supported to be more vibrant than it is at the moment? COVID prescribes that we observe social distancing. So I believe having 100% labor for farm work will not be very advisable at this point in time. How can we leverage technology to do things that you otherwise need so many hands to do? We need to look at ways of introducing improved seed varieties to farmers, and also things like access to capital so they can practice intensification, use better technology and tools. And to finally round off, I would say that we need to do all of this with a gender lens. We need to intensify our awareness on gender equality in the midst of this all, because I believe it was Mandela that said that women are the drivers of the food security sector here in Africa. And one of the key problems we have had in the wake of this COVID-19 is the issue that women are battling gender-based violence because they find themselves in the same space as their abusers. And because of the restrictions on movement, they're unable to access facilities or resources or individuals that can help them out of the problems they are facing, though. So they are stuck with the abusers, and the abuse still keeps going on. Now, if these women are the producers of our food, they need to be in the right frame of mind so that they can produce optimally. So we are doing all of this, looking at agricultural systems, looking at improved varieties, but at the back of it all, we have to ensure that the growers of the food are well taken care of so that they have the mental fortitude and the strength and the sanity of mind to go about their business. So that is it for how COVID has impacted food security in this region. Thank you so much. Over to you, Precious.
Wow, thank you so much for that eye-opening presentation. And we are, Lebo is the one that's facilitating this session. And Lebo, I'm going to hand over to you if you need to ask any questions.
Sure, no problem. I think how we're going to run the sessions between now and when we finish, I think it's lovely that we're such a close group because it means then we can all engage on the topics that are being presented, and it makes facilitating a conversation much easier. So, and this is the session where we will have questions and answer. Before we start, I just want to say welcome to Karine and to Maureen and to Tina. I think you weren't there when we first started. Thank you for coming on this morning and being part of the session. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for the insights that you shared. I like the fact that you were able to unpack the issue around food security, around availability, access, and utilization. I think from what you presented, there are certainly some key areas where one can begin to create a framework for people to start coming up with solutions. Technology, I think, is always a key one that we always talk about, technology and how it supports the food security issue, nutrition and survival. I think finding a way to kind of say, how do we balance making sure that people are getting what they need to survive, but also that it's nutritious. The seeds that you talked about, which I think was really a great way for us to start thinking about what are some of the problem statements that we can start to identify there. I'm going to open up this part of the session for anybody who's got any questions for Stephanie or any comments that they want to make around the presentation. Also just bearing in mind that I know that you had a time challenge. Do we have any comments, questions, any areas of understanding that somebody wants to have, or any insights that they want to share that support what Stephanie has put on the table? Mandla, I see you've got your hand up. I'll start with you.
Thank you so much, Lebo. Stephanie, thanks for a great presentation. I think about 10 years ago, the big mantra was that what we need to do in Africa is to formalize food trade and ensure that everyone buys their food in a supermarket. I mean, the reality though is that in West Africa, where you are based, more than 80 or 90% of the food that is cooked in people's homes is not bought in a supermarket, but out on the streets. and some of that, you know, comes from international trade. In Ghana, I know that a lot of the onions come from outside the country. What do you think we need to do if formalization is not the answer? What do you think ought to be the alternative to make sure that our food systems can, you know, respond to shocks like what we have experienced under COVID? Thank you.
Mandla, thank you so much for the question. What do I think needs to be done so that the food systems in Ghana can stand the shocks, right? So I believe, like I said in my closing part, I believe an all hands on board approach is needed. We need to identify all the key actors in the sector, and then especially in West Africa, where most of the food producers are smallholders, we need to look at ways of introducing superior technologies to farming, and then also the issue of improved seed varieties. Because if we keep focusing on the imports, like you said, then we are going to kick a good number of people out of their livelihoods, and that wouldn't be very, very helpful for us. So now the smallholders already in there, they are the providers of their food. We need to support them, provide the enabling environment for them to produce top-notch produce, to produce quality seeds, to produce quality foods. And then, yes, I believe technology is one. I believe introduction to superior varieties, and as two, I believe also that training on best management practices, so that they'll be able to, their produce locally can compete with whatever is coming from the international markets. That I believe is the way to go. But focusing mainly on the imports alone, I'm afraid would kick out a lot of people from their income generating activities, and that wouldn't be very helpful. Thank you, Mandla.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you, Stephanie. Anybody else have a question? I have a question, but I want to make sure that or a comment that they want to make. Okay, Stephanie.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, yeah. First, Stephanie, thank you so much for that great presentation. From my side, I just wanted to ask, in terms of private sector, maybe even government intervention, what are some of the interventions that are being put to actually address this situation, especially around targeting those that are in the margins, like marginalized communities that are actually not able to afford their own food, etc. What are some of the security measures to ensure that these marginalized populations have access to food, both from a private sector and perhaps government intervention?
All right, Precious. So I would like to give my government a pat on the back, because the government has shown a lot of leadership in the fight against COVID-19. So for starters, government has instituted a stimulus package for micro and small and medium enterprises. So government has set aside 60 million Ghana cedis to support small businesses that have been greatly impacted by COVID-19. And I think there's a moratorium of 1 year, and then they have up to like 2 years later to pay or stuff like that. So that is one of the key relief packages that the government has come up with. And at a point, there were instances where people had to go to their various district assemblies to go and get food supply. So a kind of a safety net that has been provided in there for people to go and get food supply. I should admit, however, that personally, I don't think that is very, very sustainable, because you are looking at the rate of contamination of infection, right? And then having people come out to come and pick food and stuff like that, in my opinion, isn't very sustainable. So the stimulus packages in the form of the fund that the government has set up, I believe has been very, very helpful. I'm not sure whether the disbursement is over at the moment, but I know that businesses are able to access a bit of a loan to cushion them at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. So, Stephanie, one of the, they always say that they say the Japanese word for crisis has got danger on the one side and it's got opportunity on the other. And as much as the pandemic has created some stress and some challenges for the continent particularly, it's also been touted as potentially a stimulus to support, the interventions that we're putting on place around supporting intra-Africa trade, particularly as borders have closed and some of our African countries are not able to get or import some elements that they would have in the past, whether it be from Europe or from China, etc. And now we have to look inward. Many countries are looking inward within their own countries, but as a region, we have to look inward to say, how do we begin to support each other in spaces where we would have gone outside to support? From your perspective, looking at where you are in Ghana, what are some of those opportunities that exist to begin to create some of those, we call them economic highways that Precious was talking about, which is saying it's the place that where money is moving, right? And it's moving in terms of industry, and we're talking about agriculture, and it's moving in terms of markets and countries to kind of say, here are the countries where people can begin to interact better at. And we know that it potentially creates an opportunity where we start looking at regional hubs where there is centers of excellence. There are areas where supply and demand can be fostered between countries, regions. In your perspective, what opportunities exist, particularly in where you're seeing from a Ghana perspective, in terms of what you can export or what you can import better from other areas on the continent that COVID perhaps can begin to facilitate, and we can begin to start having constructive conversations and solutions around? Oh, we've lost Stephanie. Hello?
Oops, I'm
oh, we've lost her.
I'm sending her a WhatsApp.
Sorry about that. We've seemed to have lost Stephanie. Hopefully she can come on board. And she can answer. Karine, I see you're unmuted. Do you have a question?
No, not at the moment.
Okay, sorry about that. I thought I understood that we did. Precious, just let us know if she's able to come.
Yeah, okay. I've just sent her a message now. Hopefully she'll get it.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. No, I was going to say I don't have a question at this time.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Sorry, I saw you unmuted. Okay, if nobody else has a comment or a question, Monique, I see you've got your hand up. Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Lebo. I was just also wondering, because now Stephanie has put the example of Ghana. Was this, do you know, was the same situation there for South Africa, or how generalized was this in African countries? And if some of them did not face this kind of severe crisis, what have they been doing differently, or how was the situation different? Does anybody, is anybody able to make this type of comparison? Is research being done on that?
In terms of different, yeah.
Yeah, so if you compare Ghana to South Africa and maybe other countries, is it similar has it been a similar problem and as severe as in Ghana throughout Africa? Or are there differences between one country and the other?
Yeah, so I'm hearing you. So I think one of the people that we were supposed to have on today who unfortunately couldn't make it, and he's not well. He sent us a message last night to say he's not well, and was supposed to help begin to frame that for us, to kind of say what's happening in the different spaces. Is Professor Rudolph, right? And he was going to join us today, but unfortunately he's not well. And that's where we're hoping to get a sense of where is the crisis most prevalent from a geography point of view, and what some of those issues. And he's not able to, unfortunately, give us that perspective today. I'm hoping perhaps that we can also glean a little bit on it in terms of what Dr. Malan is going to present when he comes on board at the moment. But I'm also happy if anybody wants to bring a perspective that they might have in terms of whether they're seeing anything different locally, and whether there are any perspectives that we need to consider from different comparisons from different countries. But your question is very valid, and we had taken that into consideration, which is why we had somebody from Ghana coming to present, just to give a country focus. But the idea was that when Professor Rudolph presented today, he was going to give us a perspective on the different geographies and what is being picked up there.
Thank you, Lebo. And maybe a question to all of you who are just, from what you have seen in your context is, because I don't know, this is also related a bit to comparing how one or the other country does, but on the one hand, I guess dependency on imported food plays a role, because those supply chains were disrupted. And of course, also the local ones in situations of total lockdown, as Stephanie was explained. It would be interesting, I think, also to understand if that is one factor which has led to impacting one country more or another, but I'm pretty sure that is also part of the knowledge that the Professor Rudolph would have brought in. But maybe already from, you're there, and maybe Mantla, I know he's very knowledgeable, and Karen and Precious of what's going on in their context. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, thanks, Monique. Lebu, I think I agree with you that Nodia is probably the best person to give us a detailed view from a South Africa perspective, because he's on a number of platforms that have been looking at this. What we've seen is that, let me just maybe take everyone on a tour of the region. In Zimbabwe, we had a very interesting situation in that when the initial lockdown was implemented, you had a rather over-the-top reaction by government, where they went as far as confiscating food from traders and vendors, street vendors, and actually destroying it. And basically, when you in a country where, from a formal employment perspective, you're sitting on 90% unemployment, most people are eking out a living from trading on the streets, and food trade is one of the ones with the lowest barriers of entry, and therefore is a mass participation sport. Because of the media reaction to the overzealous police action, the government then reversed its stance around confiscating food and stopping trading. But what the municipalities then did is that they actually removed traders from the city center and shut down a lot of the wet markets in Harare, in Bulawayo. And farmers for maybe a week or so really struggled to reestablish new supply chains to get their food out there. So I think there's been a massive shock and impact. And I think the secondary layer is really where, because people are not working, their available incomes have also diminished, the disposable income. The spending power is also moving from thriving to survival mode. So that's the situation in Zimbabwe. Zambia did not really have a lockdown per se. And our experience there is that things have pretty much continued as normal. And what we are thankful for is that a lot of the farmers on the countryside who were right in the beginning of harvest season when lockdowns were implemented, were not really disrupted in terms of getting their crops out and being able to trade them and earning some income, because this is the most important period for them in terms of earning income. In Malawi, it's been a confused situation because of the political situation there. There was an annulled election, and then people were able to stop government from implementing a lockdown. So in Malawi as well, I think most of the informal trade around food was able to carry on. In Mozambique as well, there was no like strict lockdown. So a lot of the food trade has been able to continue. And for us, we're grateful because the region is still in the middle of a drought. And so food supplies will be scarce, and any disruption to food systems would have been catastrophic. And I'm happy to say that in most of the countries around South Africa, the situation from a food and food security point of view has not been terribly affected by COVID. But I think the supplies from outside those countries for the next season is what I'm worried about, because right now the South African border is closed. There is cargo moving in, but that's only formal cargo. Cross-border trade, which Womanomics knows a lot about, probably accounts for 60% of the supplies that ordinary farmers and ordinary folk need to deal with food security. And those have largely been disrupted. So I think we're going to have an impact in 2-3 months' time when people now need to get ready for cropping season. I know I've gone overboard level, but I thought I'd just paint that picture.
Thank you, Mandla, for that perspective. And I think the importance of also having conversations around what is happening, particularly around the neighboring borders, but I think across the continent as a whole. One is to be able to, particularly for the session that we're having here, around understanding the ecosystems that enable this industry to thrive, and so being able to understand what are some of the challenges, but also what are some of the opportunities. So when we begin to solve, it hopefully begins to facilitate that countries are working better than they have been in the past. So thank you for that perspective. And you're right. I think the reports that I've seen, particularly from a South African perspective, and listening to some of the webinars, I think Wandile Sehlobo, I think he's one of these very young economists in the country, and talks very much around agriculture, is the sense that currently, as we stand, that it has not been disrupted too much. But as you rightly say, it's about saying what's going to happen in the future. We hosted a webinar last week that was looking at where we're standing in terms of policy, etc., and how the government has responded to COVID from a South African perspective. And we are understanding that the South African government is already projecting that we are going to have the situation of having to deal with this COVID pandemic into March of 2021. So I think some of us, our mouths were on the floor. So it really is saying that it's going to stay with us for a while, particularly in the current, but hopefully it begins to inspire that the solutions that we put currently allow us to begin to operate differently going into the future. So thank you very much for that perspective. Rehema, I know you had a question. I'm not sure if you still do, or you felt that has been addressed.
Good morning. I think it's been addressed by Mandla, so that was great. It was really around the vulnerable in the ecosystems, and particularly women, and what that's likely to mean for us going forward. What is the shock meant in terms of women and vulnerable farmers, when we talk about availability, access, and obviously then the utility, where they've been compromised. You talked about cross-border, but I think even within our borders, in terms of accessing small example is just visiting the Joburg market yesterday and seeing a number of the large farmers. One couldn't help but wonder whether the smaller farmers were able to access the kind of documentation and support that allowed them to transport their goods across the province and to access those value chains and within a system that supported the more formalized, larger farmers who are not as compromised, I would believe, or I hazard to guess, as those who don't have the kind of structured support ecosystem engagement. But I think that the others who are coming on board, perhaps Dr. Malan can speak about that in terms of ecosystem parties and players going forward.
Okay, cool. All right, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I understand, Precious, you've just sent a message to say that Stephanie is not able to come back on, and I think her time is up, so she's not able to join. But please do thank us for her for joining. Oh, I see. Okay. Before we close off, I was about to close off and ask Dr. Malan to present, but I think we have one. I'm going to ask for one more question. Maureen, good morning, Maureen. Maureen is our colleague in Ghana. Good morning, Maureen. Do you have a question or a comment?
Good morning, Lebo, and good morning, everybody. Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Right, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure listening to that insightful presentation, all the contributions. And to add to what my colleague from Ghana shared, I'd like to just hint on one area that the government is also working on, and it's about taking off. However, we've not looked at it from the perspective post-COVID, and that is the Ghana Commodity Exchange. To facilitate access to markets for farmers. Ghana is one of the countries in the sub-region that has come up with an interesting program. I know in South Africa area it's more advanced, but Ghana is a new system. I'm a member of the Commodity Exchange, and it's basically to secure market access for farmers, where it provides large warehousing facilities to provide quality grains. They've started with some grains, and over time they're going to add other commodities. And that provides us with an opportunity to not only stock up food security, but also help us to get people to go into large farms. As our colleague mentioned, Ghana is basically an again.
Maureen, sorry to interrupt. I think we are struggling to hear you a little bit. I don't know if you can move around. I think what you're saying is quite an important piece around the commodity exchanges.
Sorry, I can't hear you, please.
Aha, much better. That's much better. Thank you.
Thank you. So I mentioned that the commodity exchange for us is providing access to markets and to facilitate people going to large-scale farming as a way to also help us to stock up in terms of inventory for industry, as well as making sure that we have enough food security for the population, and also looking at the future market under the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. It's new. It's something that I think we need to reflect on and try and see how do women play a critical role there, how do the vulnerable play a critical role there, how do we enable, empower people to understand how this exchange works, so that they can invest in those areas which provides almost, I would say, a guaranteed market for them. We also have our market, our usual market. There's a challenge there that we need to really reflect on. A lot of women in the various value chains find themselves in the lower aspect of the value chains. And so the value that they derive from these value chains are very, very small and negligible, a lot of activity, but no wealth is being created. These are opportunities that we can begin to look at and see how do we disrupt those systems to help the vulnerable, especially women, to come in, create large opportunities, industry, logistics, value addition, so that we can also contribute post-COVID to the agri-systems.
Okay. Thank you for that, Precious. I think you talk a very important point around the access to market piece, which is very important. But I think most importantly also is around making sure that women, but I think just generally as a continent, that we're able to make sure that we are in those value-adding part of the value chains. I think predominantly the continent is known for the primary farming part, which is really about growing the raw materials and so forth. But it's often in the areas where there's the value adding piece, which I think there's a lot of opportunity around how we make sure that we participate more effectively in those spaces. And I think it's definitely worth delving into what are some of the innovations and solutions that we can put on board there to be able to make sure that we have those systems that support participating in those value-adding areas. So thank you very much for that point. Professor Malan, I'm going to ask that we begin to go to you. Dr. Malan, we had started with Stephanie, I think particularly because she had a time challenge, but I think in the original program she would have come a bit later. But I think it's a great segue in terms of what the point that Mandla made, but also the point that Maureen just made now around the importance of the ecosystems that support this particular industry, but most importantly, food security. So thank you very much for joining us. I know you've been on the line right from the beginning.
Always happy.
And we appreciate that you're with us here, and we look forward to your thoughts. So please, can you give us your thoughts around these ecosystems and how we participate across the continent on food security?
Thank you so much, Lebo. And also thank you so much for the promotion. You know, I'm still Dr. Malan, but I'm okay with that. So I'm going to just try and get this going. So here comes here's my PowerPoint. Let's share that and let's make it a slideshow.
Perfect.
So is everything all right? Just my neighbors are building, so there's a bit of a noise. So
if you can put it onto presentation mode, then it can.
Can you see that? Can you see this, or is that not right?
I can see it, but I can also see your next slide. If you don't mind, then that's okay.
Yeah, no, I don't mind that. You know, it's always better to let people see what I'm going to say, and then they can interrogate me. So what I'm going to do, if you know me well, you will realize I disagree with the Jedi. And I really do think we need to critique things a lot more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to critique the idea of food security, but in the back of my mind is a bigger critique, which we don't do. And that is we need to critique agriculture. There are two kinds of agriculture. And if we don't differentiate, it's not going to help, because actually agriculture and the system is the problem. And I want to just pick on the idea of just market access. Market access means absolutely nothing, because we don't know what the market is, and we can conceptualize the market differently, and that's important. So I'll get to that, but the first point is, you know, the definition that you see there, which is the standardized United Nations definition, does not enable us to understand how the food will be procured for the person. It doesn't tell us who is the actor. And actually, by not saying who the actor is, my point is that an uncritical acceptance of this definition actually allows the current system to reproduce itself much stronger. And actually, it is the current system that creates food insecurity. And that has a very deep critique that goes right down to ecological sustainability. We are not producing food in an ecologically sustainable way. And we are actually underproducing, because we can produce a lot more in ecologically sustainable ways. And we need to build our food security concepts and imaginary upon those things. So the way we have conceptualized food security has often been as a nutrition and a calculus of calories. So my question is, who is then the responsible actor if that is how we realize food security, by giving people calories? Also, the other issue that hangs out is, how do we govern the food system? And the food system is a neoliberal food system, which really then means it governs itself by competition, and that pushes out participatory governance. But there is a certain governance nevertheless, and that is taking place amongst often large retailers which really hog the system. So how is that, who's the actor there? And I'm not saying we need to govern it better. Of course we need to govern it better, but I'm here focused on who then is the actor. And in that case, it's really the retailers amongst themselves as a collective. Then there's another conception, food security as a form of food sovereignty. Now, who's the actor in that context? And this then moves the action for food security to the local level. And who's that actor? Who does that? Who is then responsible for my food security? Very difficult. And then there's another conception as a healthy food market. And this I'm drawing on the work of Amartya Sen. And what we often forget is there has never been a famine in a democracy. But democracies are plagued with chronic malnutrition. South Africa is an excellent example. We have no famines, but we have the child support grant. And in the face of the child support grant, someone like Tracy Ledger has identified about 40,000 children die per year from hunger in South Africa. But no one knows it because it's not sensationalist and it doesn't figure in the public press. So as you can see, just those four, there are radically different ideas of who is the actor of food security. So in a healthy food market, if I identify the press as key in addressing famine, it's the press that actually makes this possible. And therefore, the actor of food security is the press. And we need to think about a bigger systemic way on how this takes place. And this is really, really radical stuff. And I just want to show you how these different conceptions lead to different ideas of food security. So we can think of it as an outcome of actor actions, market processes, or state policy. So when we think of food security as an issue of state policy, and this is the very, very classical human rights approach, which is really also an unquestioned human rights approach, which really allocates all responsibility in the state, which is actually doesn't make sense because the state acts on our behalf and it acts on our tax, etc., etc. But if you think about it in that way, as the state as responsible for food insecurity and the delivery of food through food relief, then you really push the ball back into large-scale grain production. And that is really what happens then. And then people get maize as food relief. And this creates a huge system of food relief, which is actually what the FAO is doing. And it's called an assistentialism. So we as the ones responsible, we are really gearing ourselves to deliver food to poor people who don't have food. And we all know most of that grain is American grain, GMO grain, that is delivered as an instrument of foreign policy. So what actually happens is we are pushing the ball back to a place where we reinforce dependency on the first world and the first world's food relief systems. I don't know if that is really, I mean, we are actually building food security on that conception, but I disagree. That is, for me, not really food security because it negates the actors at local level. So let's look at it in terms of a much more market process and a free market process. And there could be different positions, but of course, the strongest one is the neoliberal position. But this then also really focuses on production and the expansion of the market and a healthy market that functions optimally or rationally and where there are no market failures. So what would happen with this idea of food security is you would expand the market, and you would probably, what happened in South Africa and to some extent in Africa with South African, let's call it a form of imperialism, where our supermarkets have started becoming present in the retail markets of Africa. And this is what will happen. You will lead this, and it will be once again a path-dependent approach. So what do we think? If we think of markets, we think of supermarkets. We never ever think of informal markets. No, 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 no. they are informal, so we don't think of them. Meanwhile, they produce and they sell much more than the supermarkets, but we will lead to that. And this is also something that governments really like, because this also gives them power and they can control and administer this. So what my problem is, I do not think that that approach will lead to a transformation of the production regime. So the production regime is something that we need to understand, because I mean, in the back of my mind is we need to know that most of the food that we do produce, and there is more than enough food available on this day for everybody, but most of that food is fed to animals. So that then, to build a market, you will build a meat market, which will feed into the grain producers, etc. And once again, this is a linear path-dependent approach. And in that universe, there will only be one way to think of food security, and that is as food relief. But what we need to think about, if we think about different actors, and I don't want to say what actor we need to think about because I want to muddle the questions, is food insecurity is a market failure and a problem of entrepreneurship. It has never ever been a question of a lack of food. There's always been enough food available. So a market failure in the sense of huge amounts of supermarkets that actually really centralize retail and deliver from there, I do not see that as a source of food security, but for me, that's actually a problem of entrepreneurship, in the sense that we are creating entrepreneurship as a large scale, almost a late capitalist form of entrepreneurship, a corporate entrepreneurship. However, what we need to understand, and this is something that's really, really important, that we need to understand that the only way to actually guarantee food security would be to create local markets which are sufficient in the local area, that build upon the local ecosystem services and benefits, and that build upon markets as relationships amongst local actors. And that can create local markets that could be responsive to local systems, but would also include a retail component, which will in its own way be responsive to bigger market failures. And a local retail component can import food, because food sovereignty is not a solution. No farmer can produce all his own food. No area can produce all his own food. Food is a diverse thing. We need global markets. So we need to think about food security as a problem of entrepreneurship. And the only really way we can achieve food security is if we enroll ecology, social benefit or embeddedness, and market opportunities in a system that creates local circular enterprises that are sustainable, that kind of conserve the resource base upon which food production depends, and distributes benefits in such a way that social benefits are have some form of equity, and those are the basis of economic productivity, in the sense that everyone has the human development and the human capital to participate. So this really points to one thing. It's a wicked problem. And a wicked problem is a problem that's almost unsolvable, because the minute you understand it, it shifts. So we need to think about markets as a different way. So, excuse me, I'm not a neoliberal capitalist, but I'm a capitalist, and I like to think of myself as a progressive capitalist. And we need to recast the idea of markets. Markets don't operate on their own, but they depend upon relationships, trust, and institutions in society. And institutions are not the things that are only in buildings. It's also patterns amongst us. So when we talk of market access for farmers, I don't know if people have ever looked at the prices that a farmer gets at the Johannesburg fresh produce market. The prices range from 20 cents per kilogram for carrots, I calculated last week, to 4 Rand per kilogram for pumpkins. Now, I'm sorry, with those prices, only the largest farmers whose predecessors stole the land 200 years ago during a colonial occupancy, only those farmers can make money selling on big fresh produce markets. So if we push farmers to market access without interrogating what is that market, we are losing the game, because they will get 20 cents per kilogram for carrots. They will never make it. And that is exactly what's going on. So the institution of market access needs to be changed. And we need to cut out all the middlemen. I know that Mozambique buy most of their food from the Joburg fresh produce market. Half of it is produced in Mpumalanga, 50 k's from Maputo, but it's all bought in Joburg, 400 k's away, and then transported another 500 k's back to Maputo. People, this is where the problem lies. This is where the things lie. It's a distributional issue. It's about animals eating food. It's about the way we structure the larger superstructure in the markets. And those are very, very difficult to change because they are historical. But we need to think about technology as a way to transform those. Also, I'm saying that we need to empower smaller producers, and the smaller producers need to be able to produce within bigger networks that emulate the current large-scale distributional networks. And these could be more efficient, but then this is very uncertain. I'm staking my claim with a lot of small farmers. I believe they can because I've seen it with my own eyes, but I know there are many that are very, very unable. And what happens when we empower these farmers, we empower them to use the chemicals and the mechanization and all those things on large land. And actually what happens is the people who make the money are the input suppliers and not the farmer. So what we need to think about, we need to expand the idea of food insecurity to refer not just to the availability of food and access, etc., but there are other things that are as important. The actors are not just people, but something like technology is an actor. And the kind of technologies that farmers use. You can buy small little hand planters for about 200 Rand that can enable a small farmer to plant very, very accurately and even better than a big machine, 2 or 3 hectares a day. That's for 200 Rand. If we don't have that option, the farmer will have to rent a tractor and the planter for about 2, 3, 4,000 Rand a day, and there goes all the profit. So we need to think about technology, and that the whole system is not geared for food for security. The system is actually creating insecurity in certain areas where it's produced and creating abundance in urban areas. And this is a long story that goes back to urban bias. So it tells us how we embed our markets in society that we need to think about. And we need to really innovate. I mean, we mustn't give farmers market access until we have interrogated what is that market that they get access to. Because if we're going to give them market access to export, even to transport to urban centers, we are, from a systemic perspective, impoverishing local systems. And it's that impoverishing of local systems. There's no more capital left. I see this in the townships, and we see this in rural areas. That is where food insecurity comes from. So for me, the issue is really an innovation. And we need to rethink how we think about the market itself. And that is actually how we're going to stop food insecurity. At the end of the day, it has to refer to some ability for local production and local circulation so that there is a conservation of capital in the local area that ensures future productivity. Thank you so much.
Wow, that was quite awesome. I could tell right from the beginning that it was smacking of disruption, which I'm
a bit of an activist.
I love it.
Nadia, tell the truth. You're not a bit of an activist. You've got activist blood running through you, man.
That's it. But the UJ, with these logos, if I don't put the logo there, they fire me. So I've got to moderate myself.
So are you saying that there's more?
Well, not today. As I was speaking, I was actually on a premiere on Facebook at this very moment where I talk about the building of circular economies. And there's about 30 little videos there on how to build circular enterprises in townships. And I think we need to really think about those approaches. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for that. I think thank you for the energy, and thank you very much, because what you're saying to us essentially that we need to really look at the entire system, and it's not just one part of it, which is exactly what an ecosystem is. It's about how are they all interrelated, but it's actually about saying how do we make sure that every part of it we actually need to look at it, which in my mind kind of suggests that it's a lot. And it's about looking at what are the different parts in that value chain, and how we need to look at each of those different pieces and actually disrupt and change how we've been doing it to date. I liked your fact around the fact that, in fact, I made a big note around here around this idea of entrepreneurship, and that food security isn't really a market. It's not really around the fact that it's about the lack of supply of the food, but it's actually a market failure, and the problem is actually around entrepreneurship. And perhaps that's where we need to look at how do we make sure that we improve it. But given everything that you've said, and I see some people have got some hands up, I'm going to just kick off with the first question. Given what you have said in terms of the fact that we need to look at the entire system, where do you suggest we start? Because I don't know that we can look at changing everything in one go. I get your sense, your suggestions around the importance of technology and how that can begin to accelerate some of that. But where do you think we need to start, given the picture that you've painted around where some of those different problems are and where some of those challenges are, particularly around defining who the actors are in each of those areas that you've unpacked? Where do you think we need to start?
You know, that's a good thing, because, you know, this is a wicked problem. So you can start anywhere. And I'm going to make this really crazy suggestion that we have to do everything. So what am I saying here? You know, I've tried a lot doing things. And often what we do when we do development, we do everything for the people. That's absolutely wrong. So what do? I host the Farmers Lab, where we can try everything at once. And I'm being completely crazy here. Because what has to happen, it's not us who has to do anything. It is the farmers and the actors at local level who have to rearrange their own society. So what we need to do is we need to give them an opportunity to actually do that. So that is why I host the Farmers Lab. And I have eschewed any other development strategy because I don't believe they work. We are beholden by funders. We are beholden by international and first world interests. We need to fight for the people on the ground. So how do we do that? We give them an opportunity so that they can rearrange their own systems. And you must come to the Farmers Lab. I remember the first day when a chicken feed maker stood up and says, "I've got chicken feed for sale." Right on that day, in front of us, 5 chicken farmers started buying from her. And this was a market pattern that never existed in Soweto. That is what we need. We need, and they will rearrange their own systems because they are actors and they feel things from on their skin, and that is how we need to do it. So I would say, look at Hassan. I'm going to put it here, and his work on social labs. We need to think of this as a question of social innovation. Social innovation is where we rearrange society, and we often reproduce the wicked problems by just going ahead. We need to change everything at once because it's systemic change. We need to make changes at many places in the system. And one day the synergies will just click and it'll change the system and it'll flip over.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I like this idea of social innovation. And I think Rehem and I will be alive to the point that you make now, because even in some of the sessions that we facilitate for women entrepreneurs, it's really about creating the space for people to be able to talk about, this is what I'm buying, this is what I'm selling. And the magic that happens in that room is amazing. And just being able to create the platform that people can have access to markets in that way. I've got some hands up. I see Mandla, I see Karine. I'm going to start with Mandla. Mandla, you've got your hand up. Comment, question?
Thanks a lot, Lebu. It's a comment and a question. Yeah, I think, Nadia, thank you so much for being your usual visceral self and cutting straight to the chase. And I think what I liked about what you presented is that if we're going to bring about change and lasting change, we need to call the problem what it is. Having farmed myself in this country, I fully understand the system that you described, that it is basically rigged to ensure a particular outcome. And as a development practitioner of over 20 years, part of the challenge has been what we NGOs have been doing. where we've been promoting a system that actually disempowers people and then locks them into a pattern where actually there is no way out. And I think, you know, I could go as far as saying that your presentation is probably a very good prelude to not only our new multi-annual strategic plan, but one of the programs we hope to start next year called Reclaiming Sustainability under what is called the Power of Voices, because it really touches, your presentation touches a lot of the things that we spoke about there. But I think the question I have for you, Noja, is that could you maybe expand a little bit more about what I call the political economy of food systems? And I always use a classic example. South Africa has got about, you know, 50 million people of color. Most of them, some of them have got a connection to a rural area. There's a particular type of sweet potato that they absolutely enjoy. But they only get that sweet potato once a year if someone from the village comes into town. And those that grew up in the city, like in Soweto and so forth, might not even have that connection. The sweet potato that you find in the supermarket, that the market makes available, is not what people want. And yet that's where the research and everything else has gone into to create a product that the majority of the population don't like. Can you talk about the political economy that creates, you know, those kinds of scenarios and what we need to do to change that? Because we can, yes, do labs at a local level, but the system is bigger than that. How do we disrupt at all the levels and the actors that you wouldn't name but implied in your presentation?
Thank you so much, Mandla. That's a tall order, but let me just say one thing about structural change, because, you know, to confront the political economy, you have to change the structures, and these are very unfair fights that we have to fight, and we are on the back foot. So I mean, for me, the best way to change a structure is through the participation of the most marginalized. And I'm not being facetious or dumping the responsibility for change on the poor, but I'm so sorry, but it is them that have to rise. I'm so sorry to be, you know, to sound patronizing, but that is the case. But there's really a lot of good philosophy. Iris Young's last book was on justice as taking responsibility for justice. So that's the one thing we need to do. Structures can be changed by participation or by big power, but forget about changing big power. So let's talk quickly about the political economy of big power. So in South Africa, this is a very, very clear situation. Most people of color eat maize, but most people who produce maize are not people of color. And this you will see in Mexico as well, and it is a tragedy, and I cry every night about this. So why is those in power so susceptible to easy calorie-based metrics of food security? Because it's easy. So government, and I've seen this in front of my eyes, government on one day they talk left and land reclamation and expropriation, but the next day they sit around a table with Grain SA and they discuss food security, and then all that matters is the 1 million metric tons of grain, of maize that we need in South Africa to feed us. So it's an opportunism from the state that perpetuates the global political economy. What does that do at the local level? And Mandla, your example is exactly right. You know, the market then delivers the wrong sweet potato to the local level, because the big decisions, political economy decisions on food security and grains and favoring grains would lead to a similar system. How do you deliver food at bulk for the populace that translates to a supermarket? And at that local level where the sweet potato is not available, what you will probably find is a global supermarket located in a local area that sources through a distribution system, and often also sources those potatoes, sweet potatoes, from maybe even a global foreign producer. So these systems reproduce themselves, and they do that because they have to survive. So they do that. So now 2 days ago, I was on another webinar by the Association for Water and Rural Development. And what they have done is they have built small-scale productive capacity, and they spoke of 120% increases in production in little villages in the Olifants River. This is dry land in South Africa, much drier than Zimbabwe and Kenya and Tanzania. So what they have done is they've based productivity on ecological literacy. So the basics is a permaculture design of the stand, put your water on top, deep trench gardens with lots of free, cheap, available fertility from waste. If you don't teach farmers to use waste, forget about the whole thing. Just stop, building local seed saving systems. Stop thinking that hybrids are always better. After 3 years, if you save your own seeds, you are creating your own cultivar, and it'll be more adaptable. So what awards showed me is that this political economy can be broken not by confronting this edifice of the global food system, because you will just run into the wall and knock your head. You will never break the wall. So the way to win the game is to subvert it, just stand alongside it, and a local farmer that uses agroecological principles will have no input costs. They will then deliver their produce at almost pure profit for every cent of turnover, and they will outcompete the local market. It is very much a sublime approach. So a sublime approach is when you laugh and cry at the same time, because we are crying in the sense that we can't build a supermarket with local produce as big as the Spar or the other multinational. But we are laughing because we don't have to have such a big supermarket, and we can sell in a spaza shop that sells local stuff. What happens? It now circulates the capital in the local area, which will lead to the other benefits that we want. And now the people have the autonomy and the dignity of being in control of their own food system by looking at the local production that they can achieve, and that will be possibly enough with a bit of wages and social grants to actually buy the things that they can't produce through the global retail system. So what am I saying? I'm saying the answer is not going to be singular. It's going to be an absolute hybrid of 3 or 4 different systems that coexist in attention in every local area. And I think this is how we need to conceptualize the future of food security and agricultural or agroecology.
Great as always, Nadia. Thank you so much. Really like that.
Thank you.
That's a lovely perspective. Yes, this idea that it's not one answer, but it's various ones. It's various options of trying to make sure that we begin to change the way that we've been doing things historically. Thank you for that perspective. And it lends itself very much to thinking about what are some of those solutions that we need to be thinking about to be able to support that. Karine, I see you've got your hand up. You've got a question or a comment?
I think that's quite a lot of what I wanted to ask.
Could you please speak up? Please, can you speak up, my dear?
Can you hear me now?
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay. I just wanted to say that Mandla, quite a lot of what I would have asked, and did respond to. But just firstly, I think, Nadia, thank you. It's brilliant.
We can't hear Karine. Karine, can you speak closer? I think you need to be closer either to the mic or...
I'm in my lap at the moment. Can you hear me?
That's better.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I think, Nadia, things that maybe just...
you keep moving away from the microphone, Karen.
I'm not.
Just hug it.
I am. I'm like with my lips on the lap at the moment. Is it better?
Yes.
Is it better?
Okay. I'll just go for it.
Okay. So Nadia, thanks for the sort of your brilliant conception of food security and the actors. And for me, that really highlights a huge challenge, and that is that we do not yet have a common understanding of food security. And with that, there's a next layer of the things that comes with, the current food system, and that's open economic theory. And the second thing I think is the how it might manifest in the manifestation of retracted local and informal markets. It is really very difficult, I think, well, particularly in the case of South Africa, where you have the dominance of supermarkets, to make that systemic shift. And currently, what we see is that the bottom-up approaches, which you've mentioned a few of, is really difficult to scale up. And for if we can't get to that point where these local initiatives can be scaled up, can become particular policy measures where government takes the responsibility and the mandate of creating an enabling environment, the private sector will not respond. We will not get the markets to change the current status quo. So how do we influence that enabling framework or enabling environment to get these local approaches to scale? Was that clear?
That was clear, and thank you so much, Karen. The short answer is with great difficulty, but it's possible. If I look at this virtual lab that I did, it's almost 30 little videos that eventually, because I wanted to cover everything. The market that we want is already there, but we need to see it and we need to recognize it, and then we can start building it. So, there's already small scale producers, often in townships, but often in the rural areas, there are also significant access to land, although it's not as good as it should be, but there is land. There are spaza shops. There are idle taxis. There are hawkers. These things are fragmented and they don't speak to each other because in civil society, things are open and there's no a leading idea that can unify them, but the idea is there. So in this video series on Facebook, and please, it's all for free and you guys must look. I mean, the means are there, for instance, building, and people laugh at me, but farmers are doing this, build a loyalty program like UPSA rewards or whatever, between a local township producer and buyers. Harvest food waste. If there's 100 grams of food waste per person, this is food that is not eaten, offcuts and stuff like that, and the slime on the bottom of the plate. That's 100 grams. If you add that up, it's huge amounts of compost. Feed that to worms, and then from worms to the soil. Now you're adding value. Now so the answer really is to build circular enterprises that outcompete the linear capitalist enterprises. And they do outcompete them because they have no input costs. And those are the things that really take place. So what we need to do is we need to push the entrepreneurs to innovate. And they must start playing with these things. And they can do this. I mean, once they are ready, they can, biogas. You can build biogas systems with plastic buckets in your kitchen, and until you build the first one that fails. I've tried and it's failed. But I try a lot of things and eventually they come right. But, these things are going to happen. And once you know how to use your own little one, the University of Joburg, we give it at 90% subsidized to small farmers. The systems are there. So the entrepreneuring of the local level actors is what needs to take place. And we always see them as powerless. They are marginalized, but they ain't powerless. but we often, it's this logocentrism. We believe the concepts about them, and we need to break concepts. These guys are super actors, and they can move and they can act. And I'm not saying they're all going to earn 200,000 profit a year. They will beat the median wage. Recyclers, for instance, already beat the wages of petrol attendants in South Africa. There's a new economy in front of us, and we need to just jump into it. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks so much. Can I just make a very quick follow-up comment? I think for us as the development community, we also really need to approach, the whole approach to food security. I think from a development side, we often think the remedy is that we need to measure, put measures in place to enable small-scale farmers to respond to high prices. And then if that fails, there's that government's targeted safety nets and social protection programs. But it's not, I think we often look at how can we, sort of have a massive impact by doing that. But in actual fact, we are just keeping farmers back. We don't invest in those entrepreneurs, which is often, you have to start small, and you need to invest quite a lot of resources in getting your entrepreneurs to a level where they are actually making a profit and they are part of a business community.
Yeah, the other thing that I just also want to add is if you base this on multi-stakeholder engagement and not necessarily entrepreneurship development, but you make available also, especially the rich, privileged guys, make them available for local level actors. So Slow Food enabled me to do that. And we have had the opportunity to develop products for local farmers, the African rainbow maize and those kinds of things. So there's often a question of, for local markets, there's not going to be a big bang impact. It's going to be lots of little things. Someone who's earning 3,000 Rand a month now, and that is a huge benefit. But there is also opportunities. I know that Meat Naturally is out to market communal farmers, free-ranging, non-inoculated, antibiotic-free cattle. That meat, if you market it properly, is a much higher value product than the feedlot beef. But we are all enamored by this logocentrism of development or whatever, that we miss the value that lies right in front of us. And if you look at the enlightened white commercial farmers in South Africa who use regenerative agriculture, they are moving back to the same systems as communal farmers, and they are more productive, and the meat is better, the nutrition is better, the local impact is better.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you for that. I like this idea of the multi-stakeholder engagement and making sure that multiple people are involved in this problem. And it's even as we've identified that it's about making sure that we support the entrepreneurship part of what we're trying to do in solving this problem, that it's not just necessarily just them. We have to think about it. So thank you about that. Monique, I see you've got a question or a comment. Just before you start, I know that we had said we would end at 11 and there are many people that wanted to go off. May I just ask that we try and go on maybe for another 10 minutes or so, just so that we can wrap up before everybody runs off. That would be helpful, just so that we can wrap up the conversation we've just had and maybe have an alignment of next steps. Monique, you're on.
Thank you so much, Lebo. Yes, this whole discussion makes me very happy. I have had several discussions with Mandla also to see how we could maybe take a more revolutionary approach to transforming the food systems, because the change will not come from the system itself. We can influence it, we can push and pull, but it will not intrinsically change. And I think, yeah, so we've been talking about production and consumption, and I think the solution lies in alliances, new alliances between producers and consumers, because I think the interest of both is, yeah, so to have access to healthy food and high quality food. And I really believe very much in this green economy. As Dr. Malan said, once you see it, you get very excited about it. And you know that it's not very big jumps that are needed to get more people there. Because the more I talk to people who are already doing this, the more excited I get. And the more I see what a strong business case lies in ways of agriculture and ways of business that actually respect nature and respect people. There's so much to win there. And so we always talk about the business case of a certain commodity or product or whatever, and we think then of how much profit we can make. But I like to speak in terms of the intrinsic business case of this type of farming and this type of entrepreneurship for farmers. The more I see of it, the more I believe in it, and the more I see it happening, the more I see also how it can grow organically. So maybe not by changing the big players, but by creating new ecosystems, let's say. So, and these are on farm, the farm ecosystem, and these are in relationship to the farm, which is more the business ecosystem. So I'm just very happy to be part of this this discussion and this platform. And I think if we start working in this way, just building, creating like a new system, bottom up, connecting to so many very good things and promising things that are out there, I think we can really start making a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Monique. I think it highlights, I think, part of what Dr. Malan was talking about in the example that he made around, I think he talked about meat naturally, particularly. It's about showing a different way of doing stuff, and perhaps highlighting not only the importance, but the attractiveness of being able to engage in the market and producing things in that particular way that maybe people have forgotten or haven't seen any commercial value in doing that. So thank you very much for your comments. Thank you, Dr. Malan, for your presentation. I think it really, I think more than anything, talks to the heart of what we're trying to achieve with this process, which is really around saying, how do we begin to create, I would call them opportunity spaces, but almost areas in which we can invite entrepreneurs to begin to come up with solutions and innovate in terms of solving maybe this food security a problem, which, as you said, is mainly around the market is a challenge, and mainly around the participation of entrepreneurs in different spaces. So thank you for that. And I think right at the beginning of your presentation, you kind of challenged us to actually think about how are we defining food security to begin with, and how we look at it. Perhaps that's also perpetuating that we're not making too much progress in making sure that we have solutions that begin to move us forward. So thank you for your insights, and thank you for that presentation, and thank you for everybody's comments and questions, particularly for this. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Rehema and Precious, given where we are in terms of time. I think just having the two presentations today I think makes us realize how big this conversation is. And perhaps we need to be open to making sure that we have a number of these conversations that allow us to actually begin to highlight exactly what are those problems that we can help to define for entrepreneurs to begin to come up with questions to. So for me, my takeout is that it's a huge conversation. It has always felt like it. but certainly I think we need more time and more iteration in terms of engaging with some of the issues and what are some of the lessons that we can learn, and also then how do we begin to move forward. So Rehema, I'm just going to ask you to just come on board just to maybe just wrap up for us and just also just give us a sense of how we're going to move forward. Precious, if you can also add there. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lebo, and thank you so much to the speakers. So mine has been, my role has been in the background, listening to the conversation and tallying based on what our intentions were with this session. Intentions really being about having this conversation to stimulate us to start thinking about what is the problem statement we would be having with a broader public audience. I love the fact that the conversation has really put a perspective of the food and agriculture and food security narrative, not just from a South African perspective where the most of us are, but allows us to start having this conversation from a Pan-African or perspective, especially with Womanomics Africa's lens on an African continental free trade area and what that means. I think when we were listening to Stephanie earlier on, she really placed the narrative of availability, access, and utility as core to the food security narrative, but also giving a lens on how vulnerable women are actually within that statement and what that means as women, as producers, not just as producers, but also understanding them as growers and the mental fortitude that requires. I think also looking at the government set-asides and supermarkets as a construct of how we relate to the food access conversation, which gives, you know, the final consumers the benefit of the utility of what has been produced. I think when we're looking on what was going in South Africa, Dr. Malan, loved your conversation, particularly on critiquing the agriculture as the system as being a problem. And that I think what I've put here, like underlined in bold, market access means nothing, because the very construct of food security puts market access at the heart of it. And so it really is a great segue to, you know, the end point. And so what does this conversation mean? If we've identified that the current environment perhaps is the problem and that we need to be looking at productivity versus ecological sustainability, it's really great in terms of where we wanted this conversation to go and what we wanted to be able to use this conversation for. So this conversation was convened with stakeholders who we deem to be experts and who can have a contribution to say, if we're going to go to public and have a conversation about food security, how do we start framing it in a way that can be utilized? How do we start framing that conversation in a way that allows for participation in addressing the problem? And it's great because I think even Monique was putting in on board the notion of a business case. And for us, this work is the building blocks for defining that business case. And out of this conversation, and we appreciate that it cannot be a conversation on its own, and it really is a stimulus for additional conversations. But I think the real output we should be working towards is, what is this business case that allows us to interact with ecosystem partners and players to give effect a result that can be tangible, practical, and is actually effectual in its execution? And so what? I mean, what is this business case that we need to be focusing on? A quick summary, and it is not encompassing everything, but the highlights from the conversation today is the idea of the business case incorporating interventions, and this really speaks to the Solidaridad, perhaps, point of departure and where it can come in as an institution to facilitate access to resources and information about what the food security proposition is, challenge is, and what the opportunities are and access to resources for farmers in the area and ecosystem partners. There is a need that has been highlighted for a greater platform for sharing of ideas and disruptive ideas, which is what's come through very strongly from Dr. Malan in his own delivery and his own beliefs, but also practically what the system requires in order for things to change and be different, an ability to share different ideas, and the need for bold entrepreneurialism, because one of the solutions that have been put forward is the idea of new ecosystems. The current ones are not working ideally, and therefore it's incumbent upon us to essentially work with players in order to support new ecosystems that help shape a circular enterprise with limited input costs that allows us to utilize limited resources around us, but also to create new systems that either stay in parallel or destable, or essentially create new systems that the partners can support and participate in. I got from this conversation a number of what I'm starting to call Malanisms, which is basically some of the terms that Dr. Malan's been using in this conversation. And though he says he's not a firm believer of isms, I think he does deliver a number of isms on his own. And I think going forward, it's important, I think, for us to visit the Farmers Lab as a point of departure in order to understand some of what the work that he's been doing and how we can use that to define programs, interventions to support the entrepreneur. I think for us, it's an appreciation that we had coming into this conversation that there is a revolutionary approach that is required. There is an approach that is required that has a more inclusive base. From our selfish perspective, it does require that women are integrated in this. We do appreciate in a COVID-19 era just how compromised women have been, and to ensure that as we essentially recalibrate and reintegrate back into a normal, the new normal does not continue to marginalize women's participation in the food security narrative and conversation. And we're looking forward to working with Solidaridad in having more conversations like this that help us crystallize some of the problem statements that we can share with entrepreneurs. And we do believe that entrepreneurs are the key to unlock some of these solutions, or the key to thinking differently. And what we're envisaging is a platform where entrepreneurs can engage with problem statements that are a bit more succinct and bring in their revolutionary approaches to addressing the food insecurity issue on the continent. And with that, I appreciate and thank all the panelists that have participated. Would love to engage even further as we start to, refine and crystallize what this business case should look like and what this programmatic approach should be. And from a Womenomics Africa approach, this is a great incorporation into what has been 90 days of engaging with entrepreneurs, speaking about what the challenges are in their ecosystem, and bringing in a very important conversation in the midst of the health, safety, and business narratives, the food security narrative, because that's one we would love to see us taking forward. So thank you, Solidaridad, for facilitating this process and making it possible. And we see this as a key take-off point for future engagement. Over to you, Precious.
Wow, I'm so speechless right now with the presentation from both presenters, Stephanie and especially Dr. Malan's presentation. That was really groundbreaking and disruptive in its own way. Really, and also the fact that entrepreneurship, what you said earlier about entrepreneurship is a failure in a sense that, we look at market systems, where else, the market system is actually not what we should be focused on largely. I think this really has been a great session, despite us not having as many presenters as we wanted. Originally, we had FAO on board, but then they dropped off. We had UN Women and others, but at the end of the day, this turned out to be much better. And maybe as a way forward from this, we will hopefully have other sessions to cover some of the topics that we're not able to cover today. And we'll be happy to have all of you again to input into the next think tank processes or discussions. But we will communicate that in due course. I see our time is almost over and Dr. Malan has to jump off, and so does Madla and everyone else. But yeah, we will follow up with other sessions after this, and we really appreciate all your inputs and your insights, and we are looking forward to be packaging these into tangible programs or tangible projects so that it's not just all talk for the sake of talking, but we actually want to see tangible interventions on the ground. And as Madla said earlier, this fits in very well with our next strategy, which is starting already next year, in the next 5 years. We call it the Power of Voices, Reclaiming Sustainability. So these discussions will really be helpful in order to inform our way forward in terms of programming, but not just programming from our side, but also working with entrepreneurs and creating that social innovation that Dr. Malan spoke about, that we need to rearrange our society. And I think that really speaks very powerfully to our agenda as well as Solidaridad. So thank you so much to everyone that's on this call, and we look forward to engaging you meaningfully in our next, not just session, but hopefully in our programs as well, to add voice and to enrich this process further.
Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Have a good
Yes,
one.
everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Oh, it's just us.
Yes, it is. Let's talk offline. This is still recording.
Okay, sure.